It,
Where you going? No, man, you got the right classroom. Come on in, take a seat beside me, my friend. Hey, look, here come T.A. Charlie. Let's see what he got to say.
Happy 1,000. Yeah, this is our 500th episode.
Half a millennial?
Whatever that means. We're broadcasting, of course, from our remote location deep in the bowels of the LA wilderness, somewhere into the wood and metal of a nondescript building, surrounded by schnauzers and model tanks. We once again bring you The Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic. Homerooms on Rumble. Just go to Rumble and search the channels for The Road to Concord. It's one word. When you find it, you go ahead and you click follow. Might mean you got to set up an account, but it's fast, it's easy, it's free. I did it. You can do it. For those technologically challenged members of the class, you can also catch us on Facebook, Twitch, TwitX, and YouTube. Even today, I think we'll be okay today. Anyway, then you can catch podcast after the show. It's uploaded to Podbean, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Just look for The Road to Concord. Phones are on today, and if you're a regular class member, you know what to do. If you don't, email us and we'll think about telling you how to do it. You can go to the blog page. That's theroadtoconcord.com. That's where you find all your show notes, study notes, and handouts for the class. Finally, you can email a professor at joe@theroadtoconcord.com. He's really, really slow right now, but he'll eventually get around to emailing you back. And if you find our classes helpful, please click the thumbs up, like, follow, subscribe, share it, and all those good things. For anyone that you think might benefit from it, just warn them Joe is an acquired taste, and you'll probably be acquiring that today. This show is listener sponsored, meaning we do not solicit business advertising, so we're not limited in the content we provide for y'all. With that said, we do ask for your participation on a value for value basis. If you find our show of value to you, then you provide an equivalent portion of your labor and treasure through the donate link on the Road to Concord blog page, the show description and Rumble, and in the comments on the other streams. And thank you to all of those who do support this show. We would not be here if you didn't.
Hey, we all know T.A. Charlie isn't all there. Now, just stay seated and give it a chance. You'll soon realize we not might be the smartest, but we each independently form opinions based on reason and logic. We're free thinkers. Let's see what the Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic has on the lesson plan for today.
Okay, so if you've seen the title of the show, the progressive spirit in Hamilton's defense of the judiciary, that's in this, the Federalist Papers. I happen to be a fan of the Anti-Federalist papers. We're going to go over a little of this today, but first, I come to a realization of what's been bugging me lately. If you've been watching the show any length of time, you know that I've been in a bit of a mood, a funk, or whatever. Bear with me, especially if you're new to the show. Please bear with me. It's all going to be tied together today. I can assure you of this. Let's start here. I was watching the Steve Deace show. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he's another conservative political commentator. You can find him on Rumble. Steve Deace, D-E-A-C-E. He's also on The Blaze. He is big in the politics in his state of Missouri. I think it's Missouri. Yeah. Anyhow, excuse me. He helped to lead the only successful attack against the rogue judiciary in the United States of America's current modern history. And he is apparently talking to the Trump administration at a high level and trying to influence them, because he's arguing the same thing I am. These courts need to be put down. And you don't do that in the court. This is no pin here. If you've ever watched NCIS, with Jethro Gibbs, the episode where he loses his memory because he's in a bomb explosion where he's chasing a terrorist, and the terrorist is on a ship and he's in charge of the communication section, and the people, the head up, Gibbs is watching some video teleconference and they're all arguing over what they're going to do, and they're like, well, Pin's not on the ship, and Gibbs yells at him and said, are you that stupid? He's the communications officer. You keep asking him, you send him the facts. Is Pin here? And he says, no Pin here. He's saying, no, I'm not here. Well, it's the same thing with the judiciary. You're a rogue judiciary, and you're going to say, would you please recuse yourself and step down and quit attacking us? No, we're not going to. You have to put it down. So Steve Deace is going over that. And he mentions something that he likes to repeat. He says, we're not a nation of laws. We're a nation of political will. And I got to think that has always bugged me. And I realized what it is that bugs me about it now. And hold on, I'm going to wrap all this together. I promise. This will get into what's bugging me in general. If we're not a nation of laws, if we're not a nation of the rule of law, then what we are is a rule of man. Like what Speaker of the House Robert Winthrop once said, you are either going to be ruled by the Bible or the bayonet, one or the other. Well, if you are if we are a nation of political will, then that just means whichever party's in power, and that's the rule of man. We're not going to give any deference to the rule of law, which means you're going to be ruled by the man with the gun at the time, or woman, whoever has the gun. That's real. I didn't understand it, but as good as he is, and he is, we're all flawed in areas. We should understand that. Steve Deace is realpolitik. That's what he's doing. Well, folks, realpolitik is Woodrow freaking Wilson. But I realized what it is because Steve Deace is unapologetically Christian. And Christian is in the visible church. I realized what this is. Realpolitik is you're still allegiance to the below, to the earth, to the earthly way of doing things. You have not been born of the spirit above. You're not looking higher order of things. If the Israelites before the two kingdoms, divorced, before the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom split, if the Israelites had been born from above and followed Yahweh's laws, his rules and his ordinances, they'd still be in the land. They would have never split. They would have never been spread throughout the world, and everything would have been okay. You have to, what it is nobody's paying attention to the rule of law has been dismissed. We have a two-tiered system in our country now. But worse than that, here's it helped me focus. My problem, and if you've never been in the military, this may not make a lot of sense to you, but if you've been in the military before, this is going to hit hard. we've broken the faith with each other. It's like in Vietnam, the nation broke faith with its soldiers. But this is worse. We've broken faith with government at the federal, state, local level and the rule of law. We've broken faith with each other, with our communities, with our families, even with ourselves. And worse, we've broken faith with God, with our Creator. And we have broken the social contract in the process. No one recognizes or submits to authority anymore at a personal level, your personal virtue or honor. At a family level, we don't pay attention to, or we don't listen to our parents anymore. We've just rebel against everything. We rebel against our community, our society, against local, state, federal government, the rule of law, natural rights. We rebel even against universal laws of morality, against God himself, against Yahweh, the Creator. And we've created a two-tiered system. Those who are still held accountable by the rule of law, even by the lawless amongst us, that's Alinsky, hold them by their own espoused beliefs, right? Hold them accountable to that. This two-tiered system, no one responds to reason anymore. We can't see capital T truth. And we're not the same anymore. We're not. Whichever one of these two tiers you're on, we are not the same. There's no common ground, and that means there can be no reconciliation. We are in a state of social decay, social collapse. The sociologist in me sees it everywhere. Signs are everywhere. Most people don't see it. It's accelerating. It's picking up speed and momentum. There's little or no hope to arrest it right now, and there's almost no hope of repairing it. So why try to keep the faith? I almost shut down everything but Wednesdays on this show. I came close. Then I decided in the last couple of days that as long as I have an audience, no matter how small, I don't care about the numbers anymore. I see this as a spiritual thing now. And hold on, I'll get to this. I'll get to something for you. I'm going to keep the faith with myself, with my family, as best I can with my community and society, remembering that there's two of us now. There are two sides of this coin now that can't be reconciled. I'm going to try to keep it with my government, with the rule of law. I'm going to try and keep it with the Creator, Yahweh, El Elyon. I do not have to surrender to the spirit of the age. Now, I lost another friend this week, unfriended him on Facebook, and pretty much told him to pound sand. He is a giant in my industry, my business and my hobby, which happen to be one and the same. This is going to cost me business. It's going to cost me money. It's going to make my life harder. I rejoiced. I was like, finally, I can see where I'm paying a price to hold to my beliefs, spiritual, scriptural beliefs. Finally. And this was all over TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And it dawned on me, because he and I had been I've been trying to have a conversation. I now understand it's not Trump derangement syndrome. It is TDS, but it is not Trump derangement syndrome. It's truth denial syndrome. Denying capital T truth, whether it be Yahweh's truth, whether it be objective truth, doesn't matter. If you are aligned with below, the spirit of the age, the spirit of the air, the spirit of this world, the God of this world, you cannot see the truth. Scripture says so. I'm seeing it now. I am seeing the spiritual battle clearer than I ever have before in my life. And that's the division. If you're born from above, then you see truth. You recognize it. Even in your own side, you understand that judgment starts in the house of the Lord. So I get it now. I get it. Trump just happens to be the flavor of ice cream at the moment, but it's Trump. And if it's not Trump, it's going to be Elon Musk. If it's not Elon Musk, it's going to be the Bible. Those very few who are still espousing the scripture in its own terms and context. If it's not that, it'll be those who are espousing the truth of the Constitution as it was meant to be operated. Otherwise, if you're not born from above, you're still from below. That's what this is. That's what this is. Now, don't get me wrong. You got a lot of people in MAGA who still don't see the truth. It's MAGA, MAGA, MAGA all the way, even though you have GOP traitors everywhere. Oh, no, those are rhinos. No, they're Republicans. Your party's just as crooked as the Democrats. If you doubt me, where are the arrests? Where is the supporting legislation to codify everything President Trump's trying to do? Where's the walk? Where's the walk? I hear the talk, and that's what's happening. I see in the conservative media all the time. So-and-so gives this a slap down. That one's epic. This is it's all bread and circuses, and we're loving it. And Trump signed an executive order, and this happened, and that happened, and everybody's, oh, great, we're taking things back, we're winning. No, you're not. Hasn't been a single arrest made. Hasn't been a single law passed to codify any of this. Next president just strikes the pen and does away with every bit of it. You're not winning a thing. You think you are. But you don't see it. Because you could be MAGA and still be of the spirit of the age. So, got to be careful with this, folks. And that's what's bugging me, is I'm realizing how few people are on my team. So for wherever he is, that's for Aaron and the rest of you who understand what's going on. How's your spiritual warfare going? All right. Today I told you we were going to do Federalist Papers, number 78 and 79. Alexander Hamilton and the defense of the judiciary. I'm hoping that the majority of this class has a working understanding of the Federalists. They're the people who wrote 85 editorials in the New York papers at the time, trying to defend the Constitution as it had been written. The Anti-Federalists objected strenuously, especially to the judiciary. And that's where we're going to go today, because the Anti-Federalists predicted exactly what we're seeing today. And we're not ready to get into the lesson plan just yet. I'm not done with my editorialization here. This is another thing that I'm going to take you to another area that really has me depressed. I may have lost several friends this week. I don't know about a couple of them yet. We'll wait to see. I have tried to explain what I'm seeing. I've blogged about it. I've commented it on the show. Why am I afraid of what's going on right now? And I do mean afraid. Not for my personal safety or welfare, but for the liberties of mankind, for individual rights and liberty. I'm afraid for the rule of law. It's because I've been accused of being an idealist. Good. I used to bug me. I now read it. When you accuse me of being an idealist, an ideal is an idea. So I think, okay, you're an ideist. Yeah. Ideas. I'm about ideas. Ideas, you can't kill an idea. The idea is the target. It's the ideal. It's the Ten Commandments is the ideal. We're supposed to learn to shoot for them when we miss. That's sin. That's being off the mark. We didn't hit the target. So when you learn to shoot in competition shooting, once you've learned how to hit the bullseye, the ideal is to hit that smaller ring in the center that you cannot see from where you're shooting. It's called the V ring because there's usually a little V printed in it. It's a small ring. It's really small. That's the center of the bullseye. That's the ideal. Well, when we quit being idealists, well, it's easy to hit what you're shooting at because you're shooting at nothing. And when you tell yourself, well, I'm just being realpolitik, you're still shooting at nothing. You're now shooting at your desires rather than the ideal. And you've made yourself out to be God. Well, that's what was argued in the Federalists, was the ideal. And as I'm going to show you, Hamilton was not necessarily wrong in his exposition of how the courts were intended to work under the Constitution. He was wrong in the way he dealt with the Anti-Federalists' concerns. And the Anti-Federalists told him that rather than being the weakest branch of our new proposed government, the judiciary was subject to becoming the strongest, tyrannical branch. And today we see the manifestation of that very fear. We are in the middle of a judicial insurrection. This is lawlessness. And they are politically trying to paint Trump into a corner where they can claim he's violated the court's orders and he needs to be impeached. And promise you that the rhinos will vote to impeach him if they can get this done. And that's not because they're rhinos. It's because the Republicans want him gone too. If this were not the case, legislation would already be being passed. But they're talking. Talk. Talk is cheap. You got to walk the walk. There is no walking going on. None of this. Nobody's been arrested. Nothing's really happening. Except the judicial insurrection. And I do not like the way President Trump is handling it. And I can't seem to get anybody to even acknowledge that they understand my argument. First things first. This is a judicial insurrection. There are people using money that was taken from the federal treasuries through USAID and all the many other areas that Doge has discovered, paying it out to these NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They are not non-governmental if they are primarily funded by the government and under the direction of somebody in the government. If they're doing the government's will, they're not NGOs. We call them that, but it's fascism. It's fascism. Corporatism, where these so-called private entities are working with the government to advance an agenda. So they're judge shopping. They're taking these plaintiffs. In some cases, these plaintiffs are filing anonymously. Well, that's a violation of the Constitution. You have the right to face your accuser. And when you read the papers, the filings, they're not there. There's no names. But they go judge shopping, and they find the judge that they wanted. And it's 90-something%. It's always Democrats that get in the way of President Trump. It's the numbers have been done. You can go find them. It's astronomical. This is an attack. This is using the system to attack us. This is pure Alinsky. Now, some of these judges, they get the case. Well, they refuse to recuse themselves. And you get the judge in a way that's not even legal. It's supposed to be, a case comes in, it's supposed to be randomly assigned. Well, they're not doing that. You got Boberg now, who has 5 of these cases against Trump. Some of them he took when he wasn't even in the rotation. Now, the next one, he's having these things assigned to himself. That's outside of the established system of the court. So they're outside of the norms of the court. They're doing things that are wrong. They're also they're filing in the wrong districts. This one with Boberg saying, well, you can't deport these terrorists, these gang member terrorists. That was supposed to be filed in Texas, but they came and they filed it in DC. And Boberg even told him, if you file this way, I can't handle it. You're in the wrong district. So what he was doing was giving them aid and comfort. He was advising them. That right there immediately is a recusable condition. And recusal is not you should or you can, it is you will. The bar says you will recuse yourself. Well, they're not doing this. And in Boberg's case, the case with those 5 terrorists, his daughter makes money supporting illegal aliens from the government. The government is paying her to fight on the side of the illegal aliens. So he's representing a case where his daughter makes money. The American Bar Association, definitely left-leaning, says you shall recuse yourself. He refuses to do this. There have been at least 3 filings by the Trump administration pointing out to the judge that you must recuse yourself, and he keeps saying, nope, not going to do it. He's lawless. Every one of these judges should have recused themselves, but they won't. Now you have the problem that most of the claimants in these cases, 130 something or more now, they have no standing. Now, the one that's happening out west, you have to rehire these temporaries. That was brought by the unions. The unions have no standing. The person who got fired can file. The unions can't. Well, that's the purpose of the union, Joe, to fight for the individual. No, not in this case. In this case, the individual can file, but what if there's another individual of the union that says, well, wait a minute, I wasn't fired. I like what he's doing. Now the union is fighting against somebody it has a fiduciary responsibility to support, the other member of its union who wants these cuts to be made. The union cannot file. It does not have legal standing, so it can't bring the suit. The individual can. And in that case, the individual has a different district that it's supposed to go to. Not these courts that can issue the temporary orders, restraining orders, but a different court.Clean up on aisle YouTube. Thank you very much. Block that individual. So they're refusing to recuse themselves. And it's mandated by the laws of the court. The claimants have no standing. Some of them filing anonymously. Then they can't show qualifications to even be there for a TRO. The law says that in order to get a temporary restraining order, you have to show irreparable harm. And that means money can't fix your problem. Well, you fired me. Well, if you win your case, I can throw money at you. You're fixed. You've been made whole again. That's how that works. So there's no irreparable harm. Say, well, I'm a terrorist. I'm being kicked out of the country. Where's your irreparable harm? You're illegal. You're not even supposed to be here. Well, it's going to cost me money from the people I'm robbing. You're not supposed to profit off of illegal law, breaking the law. That's a principle of law. So there's nothing irreparable. Then you have to show that you're likely to win your case in the courts. Well, the terrorists can't show that. Say, well, they're not getting due process. Yes, they are. There's a separate process in place, has been for a long time, for dealing with people like illegal aliens. You don't get to have a court hearing for each individual one that comes up between. No, that's not the process that's been put in place. The legislature has put a proper adjudication system, which is due process. It was put in place by the Congress. It's constitutional. It's legal. The judges have never questioned it, except until now. And they're not even questioning that law. They're just ignoring it. So they bring these people in who cannot meet the qualifications to even request a temporary restraining order, and they're asking from a court that has no jurisdiction, and they're not even making the damage deposits. That's a matter of law. That's a law. That is a U.S. law, that if you're going to file for a TRO, where if the temporary restraining order is issued, people might be harmed financially, you have to put up all that money in case you lose, so you can make them whole. Well, in this case, in every one of these TROs, the American people and the taxpayer is subjected to this party through the government, where if these people lose, they're demanding money be paid to them or paid on the behalf of the claimants that's going to come out of our tax dollars that we can never get back from the claimant. So they're supposed to put a deposit down. That's what the law is designed to do. That's not being done. The judge shouldn't even hear the case until the deposit's been made. President Trump has signed a directive to the attorney general saying, make sure this gets done. It's not happening. So nothing is legal. None of these cases, if they ever get up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does its job according to what Hamilton's going to tell us they're supposed to do. Boom, overruled. Well, now how do I make the American people whole with all the money that's been spent fighting this, all the money that was spent out of our treasury for all of it? How do you make them whole? None of the deposits were made. You can't. You're going to get money from a gangster, just a low level no, you're not going to get it back. The unions are going to give you that money. No, they're not. No, they're not. The courts wouldn't even hear that if you tried to recover your money. There's a two-tier justice system going on here. We are in an insurrection. And then these are lawless rulings. There's no authority for a lot of these TROs. We've just covered that. The judges can only issue a TRO if all of the things I just mentioned were met. They're not. These judges are violating the law and precedent. There's stare decisis that they're always so worried about. They're violating all of this. And even when, if you want to argue that they still have authority they're overreaching. Like the case of I can't deport any illegal. He took 5 cases. That's the only thing that those 5 claimants are the only ones that he has authority to rule over, and he just makes a sweeping for the whole country. That's judicial overreach. And then how does President Trump, the Trump administration, how do they deal with this? They obey the TROs. Now, I know politically what they're worried about is if they disregard the TRO, then they're going to be accused of, see, told you he's a dictator. But here's the problem. Say, well, he's playing 4D chess, Joe. He's going to destroy all of this. You don't understand. He's going to win. Where's he going to win? He took one of these up to the 9th District Appellate Court, and they said, yep, you got to hire those people back. Then the 9th District upheld an unlawful ruling. So now you either have to go to the Supreme Court or you got to uphold an unlawful ruling. The court is taking over the presidency. They are assuming the role and the constitutional authority of the executive. And if the Supreme Court just refuses to hear the appeal from the 9th District, you lose, President Trump, and so does the American people. And the judiciary has successfully usurped the executive. They are now in charge of the entire country. And you have an oligarchy, an unelectable, unaccountable oligarchy. Comment on the board from Deltros1. How can Trump beat this since the people have been conditioned to believe that judges make or break law? Easy. You go on national television and you get as many conservative voices, media voices, bloggers, whatever, as you can in on this. Because a lot of the mainstream media, the propaganda arm for the Democrats, are not going to carry it if they can avoid it. And you explain to the American people everything I just did. And you put up on the screen, here's the law, here's the statute, here's what it means. Boom, 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 boom. And you explain to the American people, all of these cases are lawless. They're the ones violating the law. Then you put up the Constitution and you say, all power of the executive in a single elected president. That's what holds me accountable, is I get elected. These judges have not been elected. These judges are overruling the will of the American people and the legislature. They are conducting an insurrection. And I could, by rights, and you scroll down in Article 2, rather, of the Constitution, where it says in the time of an insurrection, he can suspend things, say, I should and could arrest them. And he can. He can legally arrest. This meets the definition of insurrection under the U.S. Code. Show that to everybody. Then tell the whole nation, I am not being a dictator. I am actually trying to follow the law as it was designed and written. The judges, along with everybody else in this uniparty cabal, don't want us following the law. They just want to pretend so they can use the law against you when they need to keep you quiet. I was elected to do ABC. I'm doing ABC, and therefore, my powers duly invested in me by the Constitution of the United States and the fact that I was properly elected by the American people in what does amount to a mandate, I will no longer listen to these lawless, unlawful rulings. And if the Republican Party will not deal with this as it should be by rights, according to the way they were elected, then I will be forced to arrest these people for insurrection, including all of the Republican and Democratic representatives in the House and Senate who are giving aid and comfort to the insurrection. Yes, I know. The reason that they won't do that is because that tells you civil war. And that's going to have to be the only cure. I just told you these two factions can no longer coexist. So if you want the rule of law, individual rights and liberty of the United States Constitution to survive, you had better find the fortitude to fight it. You're not going to win in the courts. We are beyond that. The Anti-Federalists were right. Hamilton was wrong. History has proven that. That's my concern, is that if the Supreme Court does not hear these cases, when the appellate courts uphold them, uphold illegal rulings, and the Supreme Court does nothing more than says, we're not going to hear them, they become law. And at that point, Trump can't do what I just said, because he will have ceded his authority over to the courts, and he won't have legal jurisdiction anymore. Nor will he have the political support to do it, because people will see him as being in the wrong. Appearance is reality in these cases. The left is trying to make him appear to be the tyrant, when in fact they are. But it's going to be like Adam in the garden. If you cede your authority to your enemy, does Adam have the right to take it back? Nope. Yahweh gave it over to Satan, to Lucifer, because Adam handed it away through disobedience. Same thing with the Israelites. They lost the blessings of the covenant because they didn't keep the covenant. They handed it over to the false gods, the Baals. Same thing here. If you cede your authority willingly, you have no right to claim it back. You will give away the Constitution. That's what I'm worried about. Nobody seems to even see the threat. I no longer care. A watchman on the wall. I'll warn to those who listen. And those, I know that none of us can do much about this. But you can learn it for yourself and try to explain it to others. Just a second here. Comment on the board from Clay Toller. The Supreme Court justices are afraid to do what's right. They don't want to be unalived. They know that is a serious threat. Maybe, Mr. Toller, but in some cases, I think these judges want this to happen. I think they're Hamiltonians. Hamilton is not a good guy. I'm about to show you this. Oh, real quick, before we get going, this goes part and parcel with what's been bugging me lately. Here's a story from the Gateway Pundit. Samuel Short in the Western Journal was where it originally come from. The Gateway is just mirroring it, echoing it. It's Dateline March 28, 2025. The title is, God Help Us. Colorado Democrat makes case for killing babies because a murder is cheaper than a birth. Yes, that's exactly what she said. And you can go to the file. You can look at, there's a video on X. Quote, a birth is more expensive than an abortion, so the savings comes in Medicaid births that will not occur. That's depravity, folks. That's biblical depravity. That is evil. That is evil. Straight up evil. We've reached the point where there is no coexistence with people like this. Especially not if you're of Yahweh. You cannot coexist with this level of narcissistic evil. She thinks she's a god. I have no words. No words. I don't. All right. Federalists. This is the side that was arguing for the Constitution. It's primarily Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay. Alexander Hamilton, he was born January 11th, 1757. He died July 12th, 1804. He's the founding father of the United States. Let me just do this for you. I'll help with those of you who are watching on the phone. Founding father of the United States, he played a key role in securing America's independence and pushing through the Constitution. He sent the America from Nevis by benefactors. He was sent to America. He was born in a British protectorate. He soon garnered attention with a series of political pamphlets and became a hero of the revolution. He died in a duel challenge by political rival Aaron Burr. I want to take you over here. This is Encyclopedia Britannica. Let me blow it up just a bit more. There's a few things in here that they mention that I want you to see. This covers his biography stuff again. He says a major author of the Federalist Papers, first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States. He was foremost champion of a strong central government for the new United States. He was killed in a duel. Then Aaron Burr goes over his early life where he was born out of his hero is American Revolution. Early political activities. Said in a letter to a member of Congress and to Robert Morris, the superintendent of finance, Hamilton analyzed the financial and political weaknesses of the government. In November 1781, with the war virtually over, he moved to Albany, where he studied law and was admitted to practice in July 1782. A few months later, the New York legislature elected him to the Continental Congress. He continued to argue in essays for a strong central government, and in Congress from November 1782 to July 1783, he worked for the same end, being convinced that the Articles of Confederation were the source of the country's weakness and disunion. In 1783, Hamilton began to practice law, blah, 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 blah. I want to come down here to something else. Hamilton went to Philadelphia with an uncompromising nationalist, he was an uncompromising nationalist who, and in this case, he didn't want 13 independent nations under a Confederate government. He wanted one country where the states became nothing more than counties. And he wished to replace the Articles of Confederation with a strong centralized government, but he did not take much part in the debates. He served on two important committees, one in rules in the beginning of the convention and the other on style at the end of the convention. In a long speech on June 18th, he presented his own idea of what the national government should be. Under his plan, the national government would have had unlimited power over the states. Hamilton's plan had little impact on the convention. They rejected him. The delegates went ahead to frame a constitution that, while it gave stronger power to a federal government, stood some chance of being accepted by the people. Since the other two delegates from New York, who were strong opponents of a Federalist constitution, had withdrawn from the convention, New York was not officially represented, and Hamilton had no power to sign for his state. Nonetheless, even though he knew that his state wished to go no farther than a revision of the Articles of Confederation, he signed the new Constitution as an individual. This should have been a warning to us. That's arrogance. That's all that is. Arrogance. It says opponents in New York quickly attacked the Constitution, and Hamilton answered them in a newspaper under the signature Caesar. Since Caesar's letters seemed not influential, Hamilton turned to another classic pseudonym, Publius, and two collaborators, James Madison, the delegate from Virginia, and John Jay, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. They wrote the Federalists, a series of 85 essays in defense of the Constitution and Republican government that appeared in newspapers between October 1787 and May 1788. Hamilton wrote at least two-thirds of the essays, including some of the most important ones that interpreted the Constitution, explained the powers of the executive, the Senate, the judiciary, and expounded the theory of judicial review, i.e., the power of the Supreme Court to declare legislative acts unconstitutional and thus void. Hold on, we're going to come back to that. Although written and published in haste, Federalist was widely read, had a great influence on contemporaries, and became one of the classics of political literature and helped shape American political institutions. In 1788, Hamilton was reappointed to the delegate of Continental Congress from New York. At the ratifying convention in June, he became the chief champion of the Constitution and, against strong opposition, won approval for it. Blah, 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 blah. There was one Hamilton's third report. I was looking for something else here. National political. As a result of the struggle over Hamilton's program and over issues of foreign policy was the emergence of national political parties. Like Washington, Hamilton had deplored parties, equating them with disorder and instability. He had hoped to establish a government of superior persons who would be above party. I got to get myself back in here. Hold on a minute. And that's just that's the problem. as we're going to go through some of his readings, Hamilton believed in superiority of people. He thought that certain people were just above others. Intellectually, morally, they were incorruptible. Hamilton believed that he was one of the angels that John Adams was looking for to run the country, where you would have no need of the rule of law. Yes, he also wanted a king, Deltros on the board. He wanted a king instead of a president. So this is Hamilton. Now, during the Revolution, he's relatively young. Early on, I think he's like 18 or 19 when it starts. He's passionate, but he's also arrogant and elitist, and he's contemptuous of the people. We'll see that as we go through some of the essays he wrote. In my humble opinion, he was wrong. Now, he wasn't wrong in the way he explained the need for the courts. But when he argues for judicial review, that is not in the Constitution. And he lays the ground for Madison versus Mabry, or Mabry versus Madison, or whatever. It's a case we're going to have to look at in the coming weeks. That's where judicial review came about. And he's going to lay the case that the judiciary not only has the right, but has to have the right to rewrite the laws that the legislature sends them. We're going to get into this line by line. We're going to go through two of these papers. But this is where he's wrong. He also argues that these elite judges are going to be above the human failings of human nature. In other words, they're sinless, and they'll remain ever so. I don't know where the heck he got that idea from. Yeah, Marbury versus Madison, correct. We'll get into that when Mr. Spikes. He should have known, but this is the playbook. This is the problem. Like I said, he's correct in some ways, but he's wrong on the human nature. And also his arguments that we're about to see, they are absolutely riddled with fallacies. They go so far as to be self-contradicting, and his elitism shows. Okay. His arrogance shows. He's dismissive of the anti-federalist concerns. He constantly assumes this intellectual and moral superiority and fidelity to the Constitution for the judiciary. In his own lifetime, we'll see that that's not the case. That doesn't happen. He seems to not understand the will of the people. He's contemptuous of it. He sees possible of problems only in the legislature and then with the people and in the different states, but he sees absolutely no threat from the judiciary at all. He does not think that the courts will ever become a threat to the country. And he tells us why. And then he turns around and says, but, if they work that way, then the courts are useless. So we have to give them the power to overthrow things the way, the Anti-Federalists are worried that they'll do. Well, there's one last thing I want to show you before we start going through the Federalist Papers. This is a book. And it's on audio for those of you that listen rather than read. This is How Alexander Hamilton Screwed Up America. And it's by Brian McClanahan. I want to read two of the recommendations on the back. This is Kevin Gutzman. He's an American constitutional scholar and historian and professor of history at Western Connecticut State University. He says, quote, Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton play, quoted in one of these recent lawless rulings, Hamilton, the play, one of the judges cited a play as upholding her ruling. It says, Hamilton's play plays up the heroic angle, essentially ignoring its subject's misdeeds, the misdeeds of Hamilton. Brian McClanahan gets straight to the matter, meat of the matter, Alexander Hamilton's destructive constitutional legacy. It is not a pretty picture. McClanahan shows that Hamilton's contemporaries realized what his impact would be at the time, and that provides a forceful accounting of Hamiltonians' effects from the founder's day to ours. This is essential reading. In other words, the Anti-Federalists recognized him for what he was, a threat. Now, Thomas Woods, New York Times bestselling author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History and host of the Thomas Woods Show, says, quote, here's a rule that will serve you well. Whenever a political figure is beloved of all sides, he's always a scoundrel. Abraham freaking Lincoln, Woodrow freaking Wilson, Franklin Delano freaking Roosevelt, etc., etc. Brian McClanahan rips the benign mask off Alexander Hamilton, who is presented in American classrooms as a great hero to celebrate. He is, as Brian shows, one of the original villains in American history. Set a match to your 7th grade textbooks and get the real story from how Alexander Hamilton screwed up America. Good read. And it's right on point. Comment from Natasha. And yes, she cited a play that bragged about having 0 white actors. Yes, I know. I get it. I understand. Oh gosh, too many hashtags. Hello. Well, hey, you know. So this is Alexander Hamilton. This is the guy that we're going to be reading his writings here. 948. Okay, let me see. I don't think we're going to have, I went over Encyclopedia. Yeah, Federalist 78 is where we're going to start. I don't think we have time to really get into this without doing a lot of breaking up, and I don't want to break this up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the break a little early. When we come back, we're going to look at Federalist 78, which was written 28 May 1788, and then we're going to read Federalist 79. 79 is a little lengthy, but I'm going to give you commentary, and I'm going to explain what's going on in it, and I'm going to show you where he was wrong, big time wrong, and I'm going to show you his arrogance, his fallacies. And you have to understand that everything that is happening in the court today, Hamilton defended. Hamilton justified the court. Hamilton knew that the Constitution that they were proposing wasn't what he wanted. So just as he signed his name to the Constitution, quote unquote, as an individual, where he had no authority to do so from his state, he helped set the rules of the convention and the way the Constitution was written and framed and presented. He got into those 2 bureaucratic committees, even though he didn't participate much in the debates. That's the, hold on, that's right here. That's the debates of the Constitution when they're writing it, right here. He didn't participate much in here, and you won't find his name mentioned much by Mr. Madison because he didn't have much to contribute. He had no ideas of what they should do. He just knew what they shouldn't do. So then what does he do in Federalists? He sets the groundwork for the courts to be able to force everything on the nation that the people who wrote and ratified the Constitution didn't want in it, like judicial review. That's where the courts claim the right to review anything and everything that the legislature writes and then tell them what they meant and whether or not it's constitutional. They claimed sole power over determining what is and isn't law. Well, excuse me, but the executive and the legislature have just as much right, co-equal branches, not co-powerful, co-equal branches of government, something he concedes to in Federalist Papers. But then he turns around and says, but no, they are, but they aren't. And you'll see it when we read through it. And that set the ground for Marbury versus Madison, where and even in that case, the Supreme Court justice didn't turn around and tell Madison what he had to do because he knew he didn't have authority to do that. It was assumed afterwards through precedent. So every one of these lawless cases against Trump right now are resting on Marbury versus Madison. Bad law. Per Hamilton's own explanation. It's not in the Constitution. Judicial review is not there. It is not one of the authorities given to the judiciary. And by his own admittance, Hamilton said that the legislature has the right and the authority to restrict what the courts can and cannot review. So by not giving it to them in the Constitution, you're not supposed to assume it's there. And that's one of the primary arguments that Hamilton used in his letters to get the Constitution ratified. He even argued against the Bill of Rights, saying, well, unless the Constitution says they can do it, they can't do it. Therefore, you don't need a Bill of Rights. Knowing full well that, in my opinion, Joe's opinion, Hamilton knew what he was doing. Hamilton knew he was undermining, and he was setting the Federalist Papers up so that people would go back to it, read this work later on and say, oh, yeah, you can do that. Hamilton said so. Well, it's not in the Constitution. Yeah, but, whatever. And even if he didn't know that, he was of the progressive spirit of the age. He was possessed of that spirit of superiority. I know best. I'm sitting in the seat of God, and I'll decide for you. And we see by his actions and his words, that's what he did. So that's what we're going to read when we come back. We're going to go to break now, just a few minutes early. 6 minutes, come back. Let me show you what he said and how he put it. And I can interpret a lot of this stuff for you because he's using the founders' English, which is not always easy for us modern readers to understand. See you in 6. Whoopsie. I can't keep the screen straight this morning. Sorry about that. Okay. I have a slight correction to make. It's not Federalist 78 that's short. It's vice versa. 78 is the longer, 79 is the shorter one. And as you see, I've bled yellow all over them. I printed them out and I was reading them, and I've got 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. They're all sitting there on the desk right now. But we're going to get going with these. We're going to start with Federalist 78 right here. And this is going to be difficult for me because, anyhow, you'll see. According to the plan of the convention, and this skips down, there's like 5 or 6 paragraphs before this where he's basically citing the authority and the roles of the judiciary right out of the Constitution. So I ain't worried about that. This is where his commentary starts. He says, according to the plan of the convention, all the judges who may be appointed by the United States are to hold their offices during good behavior. And he italicizes that, not us. Says, which is conformable to the most approved of the state constitutions, and among the rest to that of this state. In other words, he says that the judges only hold office during good behavior. He never defines this. He begs the question. That's the fallacy. He's going to beg the question. He assumes you know what it means. He never does define it. And by conformable, he means it agrees with the other state constitutions that are most approved, the best constitutions, and among the rest to this state as well, being New York. It is proprietary, having been drawn to the question by the adversaries of that plan. And, it's the property of those people who object. It says, it is no light symptom of rage for objection, which disorders their imaginations and judgments. That's an ad hominem attack. He's calling them stupid. He says it's rage and objection in their imaginations and judgments. They're not sound mind. They don't understand what's going on. So that's an ad hominem attack. That's a fallacy. So we've got 2 fallacies already in this paragraph. The standard of good behavior for continuance in office of the judicial magistrates is certainly one of the most valuable of the modern improvements in the practice of government. Again, it has not been defined either in the Constitution or by Hamilton. And you're not going to really find it in the commentaries of Sir William Blackstone either. So it was never really defined by the time. It was just this, well, it's pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Except today. Today, I can have a man with his butt hanging out of a colored monkey costume teaching first graders about the butt, the rainbow butt monkey. And yeah, that actually happened. There's pictures of it. He bent over and showed his bare hiney to first graders. I thought we knew what pornography was when we saw it, but apparently not anymore. Hamilton continues, in a monarchy, it is an excellent barrier to the despotism of the prince. In a republic, it is no less excellent barrier to the encroachments and oppressions of the representative body. Now notice, he doesn't care about the executive. He is hammering the legislative, the representative body, and the people in connection. So by yelling at poo-pooing the legislature, he's also poo-pooing the people that they represent. And he says, and it is the best expedient which can be devised in any government to secure a steady, upright, and impartial administration of the laws. So it's letting the judges be judges for life so long as it's good behavior. That's the best way to defend the Constitution. Is it? Well, according to Hamilton, it is. He says, whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in government in which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution, because it will be least in capacity to annoy or injure them. Will it? So now he's saying, because the judiciary does not hold the power of the purse or the sword, it can't harm anybody. Really? Okay. Well, first of all, look what else he just did. Whoever attentively considers the different departments in power must perceive that in government in which they are separated. In other words, not equal. Equal in power, but not equal in their authority. So what he's telling us already is that the legislature can only write laws. They can't decide what is and isn't constitutional. And the executive can only enforce those laws. They can't decide what's constitutional or whether or not they should enforce it. That's all he can do is enforce the laws. Judiciary alone holds the grounds by which they can interpret the law. I find it very interesting that we're under attack by all these idiots today. We must be over the target, guys. Hamilton continues, the executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. In other words, the power of the gun of the law. The courts, not the courts, the right to arrest you and prosecute you. The legislature not only commands the purse, but describes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated, unless the judiciary objects. Hold on, he'll get there. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or the wealth of the society, and can take no action or resolution whatsoever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend on the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. In other words, if the court says something's illegal, the executive has to make it happen. Well, whether or not we realize this, that's a de facto admission that President Trump can turn around and tell the courts right now, pound sand, and they can't do anything about it, according to the way Hamilton's explaining this to us so far. But that's not really what Hamilton means. And I don't know how those enlightened people of the I don't know why so many people supported the Federalist Papers. The Anti-Federalists, they got it. And there were some smarter people on that side than there were on Hamilton's side. You'll see that as we continue our study. Hamilton continues, this simple view of the matter suggests several important consequences. It provides incontestably that the judiciary is beyond comparison the weakest of the three departments of power. False. He thinks he's already assumed that the judiciary can't do anything to harm the Constitution or either of the other two branches. As we're seeing right now, it can and will if it is allowed to do so. He thinks simply because it doesn't have the police or the military behind it, or simply because it doesn't control the purse, that it has no ability to force the other branches of government's hand. Political power can force the hand. That's power too. The judiciary is using political power in the twisting hands of the propaganda arm that calls itself the mainstream media to try to lock Trump's hands and give political fodder and background coverage for an impeachment where both parties will impeach him because, hey, look, the court said it's illegal. Hamilton's wrong. Hamilton is wrong on points of fact. He continues. He says the departments of power, that it can never attack with success either of the other two. Yes, it can. And that all possible care is requisite to enable it to defend itself against their attacks. In other words, they can attack the judiciary, but they can't attack them. Not with a weapon. It can attack itself financially. The courts say, well, we're not going to give you any money. Law's unconstitutional. You have to give me money. Oh, well, we're just not going to give it to you. That political power now. He's ignoring other ways of exerting force and attacking people. He just totally wrote them out. This is that's a fallacy. It's factually wrong. He continues, it equally proves, no, it doesn't, hasn't proved a thing yet. He says it equally proves that though individual oppression, pay attention, folks. This is one of the areas where you need to pay attention. It equally proves that though individual oppression may now and then proceed from the courts of justice, the general liberty of the people can never be endangered from that quarter. I mean, so long as the judiciary remains truly distinct from both the legislative and the executive. Holy freaking. He just told you the judiciary can't commit tyranny. Then what does he say? Well, it proves that although they might do it from time to time. You just said they can't, Hamilton. Now you're saying, oh, well, they might do it from time to time, but they can't do it consistently throughout the whole country as long as they remain independent from the legislature and the executive. Well, what if they are united by party? How many Republican judges are getting cases against Trump and actually issuing TROs? 2 or 3? How many are Democrats? Most of them? Hamilton. They're united through party ideology and agenda. You just told me I don't have to worry about this. And you said you proved I don't have to worry about this. I don't like this man. I don't like this man. His logic is crap. And why do we hold his letters up in high esteem? They're fallacious from through and through. He says, for I agree that there is no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and executive powers. He admits there can be no liberty if you let the court decide what a law does and doesn't mean. Hold on to that. Hold on to that. And then he says, and it proves in the last place that as liberty can have nothing to fear from the judiciary alone, except though individual oppressions may now and then proceed from the courts of justice. That's called a contradiction, folks. That's an exception to his statement that it proves that this won't happen. He himself admits that it will from time to time. Totally fallacious, thoroughly fallacious. It proves nothing. This is garbage. This will get you kicked out of logic class. Hamilton says, but would have everything to fear from its union with either of the other departments, or all three. He continues, the complete independence of the courts of justice is peculiarly essential in a limited constitution. By a limited constitution, I understand one which contains certain specified exceptions to the legislative authority, such, for instance, that it shall pass no bills of attainder, no ex post facto laws, and the like, etc., etc. Okay, stop. He's arguing for the Constitution. In other letters in the Federalist Papers, he says you don't need a Bill of Rights because the Constitution doesn't say you can do this. This is positive negative law. This is Obama. Hamilton's an Obama guy. Okay, he and Woodrow Wilson. What he's saying is he is going to define limited constitution, meaning that the legislature can't do these things. It can do anything else that's not forbidden to it. If it had not been for the Bill of Rights, the legislature could censor, kill, do whatever it wanted. Everything that Bill of Rights protects you from would have been done away with. States would have had no rights because the Constitution doesn't directly say you can't do this. He said it. By a limited constitution, I understand one which contains certain specified exceptions to the legislative authority. In other words, they got authority over the whole country to do whatever they want unless the Constitution says you can't. That's totalitarian spirit right there. That's how he defines limited. That is not how the Constitution was ratified. Trust me, read the Anti-Federalists. He continues, limitations of this kind can be preserved in practice no other way than through the medium of the courts of justice, whose duty it must be to declare all acts contrary to the manifest tenor of Constitution void. Without this, all the reservations of particular rights or privileges would amount to nothing. In other words, only the judges can save us. Really? The president can veto a law. Oh, well, that's a point against you, Hamilton. The president can refuse to exercise the law. He doesn't have to enforce it. Oh, that's another count against you, Hamilton. You just told me there's no other way to do this. I know it's a minor technical point in logic, but that proves him wrong on a matter of fact. So his whole essay, his whole argument here is unsound and invalid, and it's irrational. And yet, this is held up as being one of the greatest defenders of the courts by the courts. It's never been praised by the executive or the the legislature, because it's the judiciary claiming to be superior, even though Hamilton's saying it's the weakest. And by the way, notice what he just said. It is the duty of the court to declare anything contrary to the Constitution void. Apparently, that doesn't apply if you want to usurp or take over the authority of the usurp. There it is. That's how it is. Usurp the authority of the presidency, of the executive, which is what these 130-something TROs are doing right now. I guess they're protecting the Constitution as it was meant to be enforced. And remember, interpret. Hamilton will never tell anybody to go back. Madison and Jefferson both said, you got to go back to the original arguments to see how to interpret and understand what they were doing at the time. And Hamilton's not going to do that. He never once tells you to do that. He says things that sound like that. That's not what he tells you. You got to pay attention to what he's writing. This is so specific a piece of propaganda. I have a hard time thinking that Hamilton was oblivious to what he was doing. He continues, some perplexity respecting the right of the courts to pronounce legislative acts void because contrary to the Constitution has arisen from an imagination that the doctrine would imply a superiority of the judiciary to the legislative power. Time to translate. I'm confused about how some people have imagined the idea that the courts are going to be able to be a threat to the legislative power. He's making fun of the Anti-Federalists again. Perplexity, confusion, respecting the right of the court. In other words, the courts don't have the authority to do this. So I'm confused as to why they have this imagination. Well, history has proven that it should have been very readily apparent to you there, Mr. Hamilton. This is derogatory language. He's being snide. This is insulting to the Anti-Federalists. He says, and by the way, if you doubt me, back in the Founders' Day, they could insult you to your face in much more polite and elegant language than we do today. Today, we're so sophisticated, we have to use crude curse words. He just did it publicly in a newspaper. He called the Anti-Federalists imaginations. You know, he's done it twice now, that they're just imagining things that aren't there. Well, where the heck did they get it from then? And why did they prove to be so right? Hamilton's the one that can't see it. He's the one that's blinded by his arrogance. He continues, he says, it is urged that the authority which can declare the acts of another void must necessarily be superior to the ones whose acts may be declared void. This is not him saying that. He's saying that the Anti-Federalists claim that if you have authority to void the legislation or an act of the executive, you're claiming to be superior. He says, as this doctrine is of great importance in all the American constitutions, a brief discussion of the grounds on which it rests cannot be unacceptable. In other words, I'm going to have to talk about this now. He says, there is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised, is void. In other words, if you commit an act that is not supported by the spirit of what was being done, the intent, spirit, the purpose or intention of the law, or the act of the executive, if you void it, then it's whatever act you did is void. It has no authority, which is exactly where I'm resting when I say that President Trump should go on TV, delegate where these courts are acting unlawfully, and then just say it's void. He can read that line right there, right out of Hamilton. And that supports my argument with President Trump. But that's not where Hamilton's actually going with this. He says no legislative act can, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. Well, what about a judicial decree that's contrary to the Constitution? Hamilton doesn't see that as being possible because the judges can't be wrong. Well, wait a minute. How's that possible? Well, they're angels. He doesn't say that, but pay attention to his language as we continue. He says, now to deny this would be to affirm the deputy is greater than his principal. In other words, if I write a law that's unconstitutional, then I'm greater than the Constitution and the people. He says that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. In other words, that if you let the legislative body do whatever it wants, it'll just do whatever it can get away with, even if the Constitution forbids it. He never says that about the judiciary or the executive. I wonder why. Coming on the board from Deltros, I'm worried about the boy, bless his heart. Which boy? Me? He says, it is far more rational. In other words, I'm smarter, I'm being more reasonable than the Anti-Federalists. It's far more rational to suppose that the courts were designed to be an intermediate body between the people and the legislature in order, among other things, to keep the latter within the limits assigned to their authority. Now, this is where it gets tricky. That's true. But it is irrational to think that there's no threat from the judiciary. You just said that the legislature can exceed its authority, Mr. Hamilton. But you have never acknowledged that that same exceeding of authority could ever happen under the judiciary. So yes, the judges are supposed to stand in the way to protect the people from rogue legislature. But all the Anti-Federalists wanted was some effective means of the legislature and the executive to stand in the way of a rogue judiciary. That's what the Anti-Federalists wanted. Hamilton will argue against that at every turn because he knows that that's the avenue of dictatorship. That's how he takes over the country, through judicial review, which gives legislative and executive authority to the judiciary, all in one neat little bundle. He's arguing for it in Federalist 78, although the Constitution does not allow it. And that's because the Constitution is a limited Constitution, meaning that I have all powers I want unless it says I don't. That's not what the Constitution means. The Constitution was ratified under the understanding that the legislature and the executive and the judiciary only have the authority to act in the areas that the Constitution told them they do, and no authority outside of that. Hamilton has turned it on its head and assumed it as fact, and he's arguing it as fact, even though it is not. Now he continues. He says the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts. Really? So the people who write the laws have no authority over interpreting the law they wrote. Hamilton, you don't mean a dang thing you just said. Interpretation of your writing is my authority as I'm the god of literature. So all things written. Oh, and I'm also the god of logic. So all things written, both logical and literary, are under my authority. So here what you're saying is purple unicorns from now on are one-eyed flying purple people eater butterflies. Hamilton would object to me saying that and say, well, that's irrational. Well, so are you, Mr. Hamilton, because you're making a fallacious argument, which by definition is irrational. But he just said it belongs only to the courts. That is the precise worry of the Anti-Federalists. And he just said, yeah, you're right. Then why is he saying they're not rational? Why is he maligning them here as being just imagining things? He just conceded their whole argument. A constitution is in fact and must be regarded by the judges as fundamental law. In other words, the Constitution is law that the judges cannot break. That's true. It therefore belongs to them to ascertain its meaning as well as the meaning of any particular act proceeding from the legislative body. Really, the judges. Hold on just a second. I know I'm irked about this, but so I guess these people here, the convention, don't know jack squat about what they were writing. And it's not up to them to interpret the meaning of what they wrote. Folks, it is a maximum of logic and principle and decency everywhere. The author is the primary authority of what you're writing. It is up to the judges to go back, find the authors of the law, and in this case, fundamental law, the Constitution. It's up to the judges to go back here and here to the Bill of Rights, find out what these men actually meant, and then apply it to the law they wrote. But that's not what he just said. Let's read this again. Hamilton just said, it therefore belongs to them, to the judiciary, to ascertain its meaning as well as the meaning of any particular act proceeding from the legislative body. So I can say, thou shalt not, and the judges have the authority, according to Hamilton, to say, well, he didn't really mean that. So shall not be infringed now means, unless, of course, it's reasonable. That's a violation of the fundamental law Hamilton just told us the judges are not allowed to make because, they're angels and saints and they'll never do that, which is what the Anti-Federalists said they will do that. Oh, no, the interpretation of the law is proper and peculiar providence to the courts alone. Well, wait a minute. That's the Anti-Federalist worry. And you just made their case right here in this paragraph. Hamilton made their case, even though in the same paragraph, he's telling them they're irrational for worrying about it. Hamilton continues, if there should happen to be an irreconcilable variance between the two, that which has the superior obligation and validity ought, of course, to be preferred. In other words, if a law conflicts with the Constitution, I'm supposed to go with the Constitution. Notice he said ought be preferred. He didn't say must. Or in other words, the Constitution ought to be preferred to the statute, the intention of the people to the intentions of their agents. Uh-oh. What did he just say? He just said the judges have the right to ignore the Constitution. This is Woodrow freaking Wilson. Say, well, the people elected me to become dictator, So the judges, because he's in my party, is going to say, okay, you're a dictator. Do what you want, President Biden. Who, by the way, ignored the Supreme Court on several occasions in his previous supposed administration, and nobody said boo about it. But now Trump isn't even bothering to ignore it, where he has the authority to do so. We're in a constitutional crisis, and nobody sees it. They think it's exactly opposite of what it really is. It's turned on its head 100%. It's not Trump who's causing the crisis, it's the courts. And Hamilton's defending what they're doing. They're saying, well, if the court wants to, it can go to the Constitution. But he just got done saying that if the legislature acts outside of its authority, because the people voted for him to do that, the courts have to slap it down and go with the Constitution instead. Do you see how he's arguing that the courts get to decide what the law is, no matter which way it goes? Just on their whim. The Anti-Federalists were right. They were right. They were right. They were right. Sorry. Let's get going again. Hamilton continues, nor does this conclusion by any means suppose a superiority of the judicial to the legislative power. He just said that the Constitution can be voided by the judges if they so deem in favor of a law, or a law in favor of the Constitution. That's nullifying the acts of the Constitution. What does he mean that they're not superior? Remember earlier he conceded, yep, if I can nullify the acts of another, but that's just some imaginary thing that the Anti-Federalists are coming up with. He just got done in the previous paragraph saying they can do that. Now he says, it only supposes that the power of the people is superior to both. He's saying, well, I'm actually arguing that the people are superior to everybody. Well, no, he's going to argue against that here in a little bit. And he says that that where the will of the legislature declares in its statutes stands in opposition to that of the people declared in the Constitution, the judges ought to be governed by the latter rather than the former. So if the will of the people is to go against the Constitution, I got to go with the Constitution. I should. I don't have to. But what if the legislature does something the judiciary doesn't like? Madison says it's up to them. They have sole authority over what the law does and doesn't mean, so they can just consider it a living document and interpret it any way they need. It's what he's arguing. He doesn't realize it, or he does, in which case he's pure evil. This is one of the reasons I think he's doing this intentionally. Either the man was stupid, or his essay here, his op-ed is so convoluted and self-contradictory because he's trying, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. He's trying to deceive his audience. That's why this is ugliness. And I doubt many people sat down and actually interpreted it this way. If you're in the judiciary who thinks that you've just been handed the kingship through Hamilton and judicial review, well, you'll support this. But it'll be just as irrational and filled full of fallacious arguing as anything else. He says they ought to be regulating their decisions by the fundamental law, by the Constitution, rather than by those which are not fundamental. Ought, not necessarily have to, according to Hamilton. This exercise of judicial discretion in determining between two contradictory laws is exemplified in a familiar instance. So pay attention to what he's about to say. It's not uncommon. It not uncommonly happens. In other words, it happens a lot that there are two statutes existing at one time, clashing in whole or in part with each other, two contradictory laws. And neither of them contain any repealing clause or expression. In other words, none of them have a clause that says, well, the whole law is unconstitutional. Folks, the way the law is supposed to work, if they conflict with the Constitution, the whole law is supposed to be unconstitutional. A judge has no authority to rewrite the law, even in part or in whole. Pay attention to what he's about to say. Hamilton says, in such a case where the law conflicts, it is the province of the courts to liquidate and fix their meaning and operations. Liquidate, rewrite the law, and fix their meaning and operations, just like Judge Roberts did with Obamacare. Hamilton's saying that Roberts did not act unlawfully. He did the right thing. Folks, if you rewrite a law, you have nullified the legislature's act, which Hamilton just said they have no authority to do. And you don't have to worry about it. You're just an irrational, imaginary person if you're worried about that, because it can't happen, even though he just said that that's their duty. Hamilton says, so far they can be that so far as they can by any fair construction be reconciled to each other, reason and law conspire to dictate that this should be done. In other words, make the two laws conform with each other. You have to rewrite the law to do that. He says the judiciary has that authority. Where this is impractical, it becomes a matter of necessity to give effect to one in the exclusion of the other, nullify a law, something he just said the judiciary can't do. Now he's saying it's their duty. The rule which is obtained in the courts for determining their relative validity is that the last in order time shall be preferred to the first. Unless, of course, the proceeding is a fundamental law. This man is full of horse hockey. He said, but this is a mere rule of construction, not derived from any positive law. In other words, this process that he's explaining has not been given that authority. The process has not been stipulated by the legislature or the Constitution. The judiciary has just accepted it onto themselves. He says, but from the nature and reasoning of things, they accepted it because, they gave themselves this ability, this practice, because it just sounds reasonable. It is a rule not enjoined upon the courts by legislative provision, but adopted by themselves. So now they're legislative, executive, and judiciary all wrapped up into one body, according to Hamilton, even though he says that's not the case. Which is it, Hamilton? Is anybody thinking that he would have been really good at competing with Clinton, speaking out of both sides of his mouth? As consonant to the truth and propriety for the direction of their conduct as interpreters of the law, they thought it reasonable that between the interfering acts, in other words, interpreting acts of an equal authority, that which was the last indication of its will should have the preference, unless, of course, it's the Constitution. In other words, the most recent law takes precedence over the last law. Well, how's that work? How do you... One of them might be unconstitutional, and the other one might not. Maybe Hamilton should have said he should have gone back to the authors of the law to interpret what they were trying to do, and how, and why. But that's not what he argues. They get to interpret it whatever way they want. He says, but in regard to the interfering acts of the superior and subordinate authority of an original and derivative power, the nature and reasoning of things indicate the converse of the rule is proper to be followed. Blah, 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 blah. Reason says we shouldn't do that, even though they're doing it. He says they teach us that the prior act of superior ought to be preferred to the subsequent act of the inferior and the subordinate authority, and that, accordingly, whenever a particular statute contravenes with the Constitution, in other words, the courts are not acting the way they're supposed to act, even though the legislature hasn't given them authority to do that. They've just taken it upon themselves, something he just argued that the Anti-Federalists are irrational about imagining happening and can't happen because he just said how it can't happen, even though they're doing it. He says it will be the duty of the judiciary tribunals to adhere to the latter and disregard the former. In other words, Constitution über alles. But that's not what they do. And even if they do, he said they have the authority to interpret the Constitution whichever way they want. So, like Jefferson said, in the hands of the judiciary, the Constitution becomes a mere thing of clay. I consider myself to be in really good company right now because I'm seeing the exact same thing in Hamilton's explanation of the courts that Jefferson did. And unlike Hamilton, Jefferson was a real genius. Hamilton continues, it can be of no weight to say that the courts on the pretense of repugnancy may substitute their own pleasure to the constitutional intentions of the legislature. What? Let me translate for you because I do know what this means. It can be of no importance to say that the courts on the assumption of repugnancy, that means the opposition, on the assumption that they can do the opposite, may substitute their own pleasure. They can do what they want, their own pleasure to the constitutional intentions of the legislature. He's saying that the Anti-Federalists are, it's not important to think that the courts can just take it upon themselves to put their will in place of the legislature. He's mocking the Anti-Federalists again. If you doubt that this is what this means, go to the Webster's 1828 dictionary, look up pretense. You have to use an S instead of a C because they spell it differently back then. And then look up repugnant. You're going to find out I'm right. See, Charlie, I can interpret this stuff. I've read these people a lot. This is fancy language for saying you guys are imagining things, Anti-Federalists. The courts never be so arrogant as to think they could substitute their will for that of the people who wrote and ratified the Constitution, which is exactly what they've done. And it's exactly what Hamilton just got done saying they have the authority and duty to do. He's just saying that because they're experts, they're elitists, they're angels, they would never do that. Because I'm Hamilton, I would never do that. Yes, you would. You're the ones that would do it first. He says this might as well happen in the case of two contradictory statutes, or it might as well happen in every adjudication upon a single statute. The courts must declare the sense of the law, and if they should be disposed to exercise will instead of judgment, the consequence would equally be the substitution of their pleasure to that of the legislative body. In other words, as soon as they exercise their will, as soon as they said, well, it should be or it ought be, or I don't like what you're doing, Trump, they're no longer a judge. Per Hamilton's own sense, he said if they're exercising will, that they're not acting as a proper judge. He says the observation, if it proved anything, would prove that there ought to be no judges distinct from that body. No judge outside the legislator. But in all of his other papers, he's going to argue that you can't have that. He just said if you have the judges from in the legislature or the judges in the executive in the same body, you don't have liberty. So what he's arguing here in a roundabout way, this is a fallacy here. He's arming the affirmative from the negation. He's basically saying you guys are an idiot to think this is going to happen. It won't happen because it can't happen. If it does, it's wrong, even though they have to do that. The nature of being a judge, they have to do the very thing you say that they're going to do, even though they can't do it. It's garbage. It's pure garbage. He says, if the courts of justice are to be considered as bulwarks of a limited constitution against legislative encroachment, in other words, if they're our final protection, this consideration will afford a strong argument for the permanent tenure of judicial offices, since nothing will be contributed so much as this to the independent spirit of the judges, which must be essential to the faithful permanence of so arduous a duty. In other words, they have such a hard duty that you need to make them permanent, lifelong appointments, and that'll make sure that they stay angels. Really? If I can't be fired, why do I need to stay an angel? I can go do whatever the heck I want to do. He never once considers that position. He just poo-poos it. This independence of the judges is equally requisite to guard the Constitution and the rights of individuals from the effects of those ill humors which the arts of designing men or the influence of particular conjunctures sometimes disseminate among the people themselves, and which, though they speedily give place to better informed and more deliberate reflection, have a tendency in the meantime to occasion dangerous innovations in the government and serious oppressions of the minority party in the community. Blah, 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 blah. What did he just say? You got to make the judges independent so that they can stay angels, so that when the people try to force things down the country's throat through their elected bodies, which are always going to be doing things they shouldn't be doing, the judges can correct that because they're smarter and wiser. So in other words, the judges were supposed to stop Woodrow freaking Wilson and the institution of bureaucracies. Did they do so? No. Hamilton was wrong. He says, though I trust that the friends of the proposed Constitution will never occur with the enemies in questioning the fundamental principles of Republican government. Yeah, they do. They're doing it right now, which admits the right of the people to alter or abolish the established Constitution whenever they find it is inconsistent with their happiness. Yet it is not to be inferred from this principle that the representatives of the people, whenever a momentary inclination happened to lay hold of a majority of their constituents incapable with the provisions in the existing Constitution, would on the account be justifiable in violation of those provisions. In other words, the people can't pass a law that overrules the Constitution. In other words, this argument about democracy, he just said we're a representative. He's right on a lot of this, folks. That's the problem. In principle, he's right, but in dismissing the anti-federalist concerns, he is wholly wrong. He never once stops to consider that the judiciary might do this, especially if they're can't be removed, which is exactly what the anti-federalists were worried about. He then says, or that the courts would be under a greater obligation to connive an infraction in this shape. In other words, courts would never, ever want to violate the Constitution. They're too good a people. Really? Where'd you find those angels, Hamilton? Well, me, for one. Yeah. He says, then when they had proceeded wholly from the cabals of the representative body, in other words, the representative body are bad, the people are bad, they're going to do things they shouldn't do, and we got to have these angels to stop them in the judges' chambers. Until the people have by some solemn and authoritative act annulled or changed the established form, it is binding upon themselves collectively as well as individually, and no presumption or even knowledge of their sentiment can warrant their representatives in a departure from it. In other words, the people are bound by the Constitution, but not the judges. Hamilton just said that earlier. He said the judges are the law. So they're not bound by, I guess the judges aren't the people. Do you see what just happened? Hamilton has laid out the case that they are not only above the executive and above the legislature, they're above the people. They're not part of the people. The people are bound by the Constitution, but not the judiciary. This is prior to such act. In other words, until they nullify the Constitution or amend it. But it is easy to see that it would require an uncommon portion of fortitude in the judges to deny their duty as faithful guardians of the Constitution, where legislative invasion of it had been instigated by the majority voice of the community. In other words, if the courts try to force the judges to do what's right when they go rogue, well, then the judges can't stay rogue or do what's right. And by the way, in one of the other Federalist papers, he argues that a judge has got authority to judge cases not only of property, but of equity. In other words, well, I just don't think that seems right. The law says property, but I have to go with equity. In other words, Hamilton's going to give the court free rein to do absolutely anything it wants. He says, but it is not without a view to infraction of the Constitution. Only the independence of the judges may be essentially safeguarded against the effects of occasional ill humor in society. In other words, we've got to protect the judges from you people who may not like what the judges do. These sometimes extend no farther than to the inquiry of private rights of a particular class of citizen, but unjust and partial laws. Here also the firmness of the judicial magistracy is of vast importance in mitigating the severity and confining the operation of such laws. Well, that law is based on merit, but it's equity that you've had a history of slavery behind you, so we're going to institute racism and preferential treatment in the form of affirmative action and DEI. That's the judge interpreting the law according to equity, which is in another one of Hamilton's essays. It's unconstitutional, except that the judge has the authority to do this. He just said so. That makes him judicial magistrate. It not only serves to moderate the immediate mischiefs of those which may have been passed. In other words, if the people try to stop any of this, we can overrule it. Even though earlier in this very same essay, he said that the judges will never overrule somebody else because that would make them superior, and they're actually the weakest. He's contradicting himself again and again and again. But it operates as a check upon the legislative body in passing them. In other words, it keeps them from even passing those laws because they know that the courts are going to strike them down, who perceiving that obstacles to the success of iniquitous intentions, in other words, their intent to try and do what they think is right according to the Constitution, can be thwarted by the judges, are to be expected from the scruples of the courts, are in a manner compelled by very motives of the injustice they mediate. In other words, the courts are going to recognize that if they don't do the right thing, they're going to be just as guilty as the legislature. So that's going to keep these angels performing as lawful and obedient angels. It qualifies their attempts. This is the circumstance calculated to have more influence upon the character of our government than but a few may be aware. The benefits of the integrity and moderation of the judiciary have already been felt in more states than one. See, the judiciary is so benevolent that it's been felt in all these states. And though they may have displeased those whose sinister expectations they have disappointed. In other words, if you disagree with the judges, you're sinister. That's because only the judges have the right to interpret the Constitution, not the legislator, not the people. It says, have displeased. It says, they may have commanded the esteem and applause of all the virtuous and disinterested. In other words, if you disagree with me, you're not virtuous. That's another attack. Now, this time on anybody who disagrees with him. Considerate men of every description ought to prize whatever will tend to beget or fortify that temper in the courts. In other words, if you're considerate, if you're thoughtful, you're going to agree with Hamilton. See what he's doing? This is the fallacy of either or. It's loaded language. He's placing you in a position where you have to agree with him or you're all these bad things. as no man can be sure that he may not be tomorrow the victim of spirit of injustice, especially from the courts, by which he may be gainer today. In other words, I might succeed today, but not tomorrow. This is why the left is going to violence right now. All of a sudden, he found out that the courts might actually be in Trump's hands. Oh, well, we can't have that. Of course, the courts are supposed to be perfect about this and not allow that to happen. And every man must now feel that the inevitable tendency of such a spirit is to sap the foundations of public and private confidence and to introduce it in its stead universal distress and distress, which is exactly what the Anti-Federalists were worried about. That inflexible and uniform adherence to the rights of the Constitution and of individuals, which we perceive to be indispensable in the court of justice, can certainly not be expected from judges who hold their offices by a temporary commission. In other words, if it's a temporary commission, I can never expect you to do what's right. So the only thing that makes a judge perfect is having unlimited authority to construe the law any way he wants and be beyond the reach of the people, the Constitution, the executive, or the legislature. In other words, kings. Oh, even more so, gods, because they're above the people as well. Periodical appointments, however, regulated or by whomsoever made, would in some way or other be fatal to their necessary independence. That's not what he says in Federalist 81. It says the opposite. If the power of making them was committed either to the executive or legislature, there would be danger of an improper compliance to the branch which possessed it. If to both, there would be an unwillingness to hazard the displeasure of either. If to the people or to the person chosen by them for the special purpose, there would be no greater disposition to consult popularity, to justify a reliance that nothing would be consulted by the Constitution and the laws. In other words, if I don't have lifelong appointment, I might bow to the will of the people or the legislature or the executive and not the Constitution, even though he just got done saying that even if I have a lifelong appointment, and you can't do nothing to me, I can still interpret the Constitution any way I want because interpretation of the Constitution belongs to the judiciary alone. This is yet a further and weightier reason for permanency of the judicial offices. No, it isn't. It's actually, this entire essay has been a justification of the Anti-Federalist position. He says, which is deducible from the nature of the qualifications they require. Okay, now he's going to say that it's deducible from the he's going to argue for technocracy, for expertism. He says, it has been frequently remarked with great propriety, in other words, it's proper to say this, that a voluminous code of laws is one of the inconveniences necessarily connected to the advantage of free government. In other words, we have so many laws, nobody can keep track of them. Even though founding fathers said that that's the negation of the law, and they were citing Cicero when they said that. If the laws be so numerous that nobody can know and understand them, they certainly be tyranny. And I'm summarizing Cicero's thoughts there. And Hamilton just negated that, even though that actually did come up in the conventions. He says, to avoid an arbitrary discretion in the courts, in other words, just the courts doing whatever they want because they've had bad bratwurst last night, it is indispensable that they should be bound down by strict rules and precedents which serve to define and point out their duty in every particular case that comes before them. Then how are they supposed to be interpreting the law? If they're bound down by the cases before them, this is stare decisis. He's saying stare decisis has to govern the judges. He just argued for them to be able to adjudicate their judgment based on the Constitution. Then he said that the first law over the last law. Now he's saying, well, wait a minute. I have to be bound down by the previous law. How can I adjudicate the new law that's supposed to take precedent over the old when you're now telling me that the old binds me? And he says, and it will readily be conceived from the variety of controversies which grow out of the folly and wickedness of mankind, that the records of those precedent must unavoidably swell to a very considerable bulk, and must demand long and laborious study to acquire a competent knowledge of them. In other words, as all this grows, fewer and fewer people are going to be able to do this. That's what he's exactly about to say. He says, hence it is that there can be but few men in society who will have sufficient skill in the law to qualify them for the stations of judges. Only a very few people are smart enough to do this. And making the proper deductions for ordinary depravity of human nature, the number must be still smaller of those who unite the requisite integrity with the requisite knowledge. In other words, the people smart enough and the angel people smart enough are very small. That's exactly what he's arguing for. The people who are beyond reproach of the faculties of human nature, who will apply this knowledge of the law is very small, and therefore they should be lifelong appointees because we don't have any more of them. He says, these considerations apprise us that the government can have no greater option between fit character and that of temporary duration in office, which would naturally discourage such characters from quitting a lucrative line of practice to accept the seat on the bench. He just said that the only reason that they'll take the bench is because they're bulletproof and nothing can happen to them. Otherwise, they'll stay for the money. Really? You just cited the frailties of human nature. Well, if money is, he just said that even these judges who are saints would put money over the possibility that they might not be able to keep their position for life. He just negated his own impression, his own assertion that they're saints. He's saying that they have human weaknesses that he just said that these judges are above. They would have a tendency to throw the admiration of justice in the hands of less able and less well qualified to conduct with utility and dignity. In other words, the capable people who can make money, they're not going to become justices. The incapable who are beneath us, who are not capable. Oh, wait a minute. The idiots who are currently sitting on the bench. Thank you, Anti-Federalists. In the present circumstances of this country and in those which it is likely to be for a long time, the disadvantages of this score would be greater than they may at first sight appear. But it must be confessed that they are far inferior to which present themselves under other aspects of the subject. Wrong. Wrong. Just wrong. Now, we're not going to have time to continue with this. It goes on. And in Federalist 79, what he's going to argue is you can't even kick a judge off the bench if they get too old. Or you can't question their mental faculties. If they start to have dementia, you can't do that because there's no science that judges their faculty, their mental faculties. And then he's going to say that even in the case of insanity, because there's no way of defining insanity, and if you can remove a judge for mental defect or insanity, then it's going to be used by party politic to get rid of judges they don't like. It'll be abused. So he's going to argue for that. And then he finally says in this one that even for the case of common decency, so that I don't call an old man mentally unfit like Biden, I can't even remove the judge no matter what. And that's what's all that in Federalist 79. So he's wanting kings. Now, he tells you that we have to have these judges because we don't have enough people to do it without. There's too much law and precedent. Let me show you why he's wrong. So Joe gets appointed to be a Supreme Court justice, and I've never once studied the law. Okay? I have the Constitution. I have the debates of the Constitution. I have the argument for ratifying it, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. And I have the exposition by not Chief Justice, but Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story about how the ratification was understood. I don't need a single precedent. I can take the case you give me today, hold it to what's in here, and adjudicate it all by myself. Stare decisis is unconstitutional. Because if a judge makes a bad ruling, like Mayberry versus Madison, it supposedly binds the hands of every judge that follows. So whereas the people cannot amend the Constitution just by an act of law, Hamilton just said you can't do that, and we need these angel judges to stop you from doing that. The judge can amend the Constitution through judicial decree, thereby binding the hands of every judge that comes after him or her. And that's okay, because the judges are angels. That's what he argued. I was going to ask you to read Federalists 80, 81, 82, 83 for next week. I can't handle any more of this. It's like reading Wilson. It's all Hamilton. It's all Hamilton, and it's all garbage. This man is... I would have loved to have lived with him in the same time period and been able to get into my philosophy class with him. Mopping the floor with that fool would have been a piece of cake. I could have literally eaten pizza and drank beer with friends in the room and taking time just long enough that that's a fallacy right there, Dean, and that one there and there. And he just contradicted himself here, and then let him ramble on for a while I'm eating pizza and converting with my buddies again. Hamilton's a piece of cake. How he has been elevated to the statute he has with Federalist Papers is very easy to explain. He is only a hero to the progressive spirit. He's a villain to the spirit of liberty, natural law, and natural rights. The Anti-Federalists. Biggest mistake Thomas Jefferson ever made was deciding to join hands with James Madison and switch from the Anti-Federalists to the Federalists. Court of law equal King's Court, according to Deltros. The way it is now, yes. The only thing the Anti-Federalists were asking for was an effective means of being able to remove bad judges. Hamilton would tell you, oh, you got the impeachment right. You can impeach them. That's in 79, rather. Federalist 79. You know how hard it is to impeach them, especially if they've joined with a party. If you got party, and that's what we have. If you doubt that the judiciary has been compromised, why do they always ask the judges when they're being confirmed if they'll adhere to stare decisis? The previous rulings. They never ask those judges a single thing about how do you understand the Constitution? What do you think the limits of the president are here, or the executive, or the judiciary? They never ask them about their allegiance to the Constitution. It's probably because they don't even teach the Constitution in law school anymore, and they don't. They always ask the judges, is your allegiance going to be to the judiciary? It's usurpations of the Constitution. Are you going to be loyal to the king, the judicial king's court? Or are you going to be a rogue who's actually going to follow the Constitution? And what did they do to Justice Bork for doing that? What did they do to Alito, Scalia, Thomas for adhering to the Constitution? Doing exactly what Hamilton just said that their little saints are supposed to do. They vilify him. They won't even confirm him, even though Bork was a highly prominent justice. He was eminently qualified to be on the Supreme Court. That was political. But I thought the justices didn't have to worry about that. Hamilton said.
Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar to what I was facing as I was leaving my service with the government, because we have this oath that we take to the Constitution of the United States. Yet when I would go before the people evaluating me for security clearance, the questions were not, are you loyal to the Constitution of the United States? It's, are you loyal to the government of the United States? There's a difference.
Hamilton would have had no problem with being loyal to the government.
Yeah, well, I see that.
Even though he said you're loyal to the Constitution. Okay, Charlie, I know you. Did any of this sound familiar to you from when you were going through the Federalist Papers?
Well, some of it, yeah, but boy, I didn't.
Do I read it differently?
You do, you do.
Now, do you think I'm reading it wrong?
I don't think so.
I understand what the man's saying.
I see where you're coming from, and when you put it in those terms, I'm like, okay, I see stuff now that you see that I didn't see when I read it for my first time.
For those who don't know me well, if you want to evaluate me, I have literally read thousands of pages of Jefferson, Madison, all the big founding fathers, but I've also read as much as I could get a hold of from Benjamin Rush, from Franklin, from Trex Coat, from several of the other, Patrick Henry, God, read him. Gouverneur Morris, oh my God, read his work. Patrick Henry and Gouverneur Morris almost stopped the Constitution by themselves, one at a time. Okay, there was one of them on the floor of the Congress arguing, and he had to go back to Pennsylvania, and he said, "Hey, my buddy Patrick, would you take over?" And they filibustered the entire founding fathers by themselves for a while. I think Henry was 28 days he held up the Federalists with his counter arguments. And they've been proven correct, all of them.
Yeah.
And all of them, every concern they had. Even, and you know what? If you read Hamilton closely, like we just did, he concedes their points. He even makes their points. He admits to them. And then he turns around and says, but you don't have to worry about it. It won't happen. You just said it would. I don't understand how the Constitution got ratified without some effective means for eliminating bad judges.
Yeah.
I don't. It also violates the principle that Jefferson told us. It said that we should not bind the next generation to our laws. Every law should sunset no more than 20 years. That's what Jefferson, and he's right. Otherwise, the dead rule the earth. The dead rule the living.
Yeah.
Well, if I appoint a judge who's going to be around for 60 years, I'm binding the next 2 generations to that moron.
Right. Yeah. If they would have defined good behavior and what we can, and I mean, it is technically there because Congress can just eliminate the districts. I mean, the only part they can't do much about is the Supreme Court.
Well, that's okay. Look,
that's a different.
Before we get to that, the equal branches of the government, the only one that is actually equal is the Supreme Court. All the lessers are under whose jurisdiction and authority? The legislature, per the Constitution. Did not Hamilton say the judges are supposed to be bound by the Constitution? Didn't he say that in what we just read?
Yeah.
The Constitution says the legislature has authority over those courts. So what would happen, do you think, if the Republicans somehow managed to push a bill through the House and Senate and Trump signed it, doing away with their jurisdictions? Do you think that these courts that are currently in insurrection would grab hold of that ruling and say, oh, that's unconstitutional?
It would.
Hamilton also argued, must be bound by that, but then again, not.
Right.
Because I can interpret the law they just wrote. Well, the law didn't really mean to get rid of all of us. That's just the whims of the people that elected Trump to get rid of us, which the people can't amend the Constitution that way. And they'll just ipso facto say that law is unconstitutional. Now, what do you do? Now, what do you do?
Yeah.
You have one act left, the force of the gun. And in optics, who's going to be the bad guy? The courts that are totally lawless, or Trump that tries to reinforce the law.
Right.
Now, we see what happened with this. When BLM and Antifa were burning down our cities, Trump had a duty to stop that with the National Guard. He refused to do his job because he didn't want to be seen as the tyrant. And look what happened.
Right.
We're still paying the price for that. He gave us the lockdowns because he didn't want to be seen as somebody who was letting grandma die because of COVID, even though we now know very few people died of COVID. They all died from the treatment they were given, which was known at the time to be ineffective and deadly. This is all known. If you haven't been following up with what's going on with COVID, that was an attempt to overthrow the nations of the world, the Western nations, and to destroy the middle class all in one fell swoop. That was your global reset. You're under the New World Order right now. You just don't realize it.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
You're under it. And that's what we're seeing right now is New World Order is finally got an actual opponent, an opposition opponent. And Trump's fighting this legally. This is not a legal battle. You are not going to win this. You cannot beat organized crime in the courts. That's why we had to write the RICO statutes, and they still don't work. You cannot beat gangsters with the court system. You cannot beat the drug cartel with the court system. You cannot beat cybercrime with a court system. It cannot be defeated. And this judicial insurrection cannot be fought and defeated through the legal. You're asking the courts to defeat themselves.
You're right.
It's not going to happen. And I can't get people who are supposedly on my side to understand it. They all think I'm the one that's crazy.
You are crazy, but.
All right. So for next week, go to theroadtoconcord.com. Scroll down right here where it says homework. Clicky. Whoops. And then it'll come up with your homework for next week. I had you reading the Federalists. I just want you to scroll down here. Even if you just pick one, read one. But the Anti-Federalists, Brutus 11 or 12, part 1 and 2, or 14, part 1 and 2, or Brutus 15, just pick one of those and read it. Please, at the very minimum. You might want to read more, but any of them. Those are the Anti-Federalists.
Yeah. Boy, they were.
Oh my gosh. Philosophically, logically, intellectually, this is Thor bringing the hammer to Hamilton.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you will see good reasoning and arguing.
And everything that they said has come to pass. I mean, it's
everything. They didn't miss a thing. And it happened exactly the way they said it would.
Yeah, yeah. That's because they understood human nature and in regards to these
paraphrase
things.
my
That's-
boy
that's
Patrick
what it
Henry,
was.
I have no lamp to guide my footsteps, but by that of the past.
Yep.
In other words, he's got to look backwards to see where he's going.
Yep. And they did.
By the way, that's a very Hebrew way of doing things. The Hebrews walk into the future backwards.
Right. Yes.
Yahweh is always telling them, remember. Who is it that's always going forward? Progressive spirit.
Yes.
Secular humanists, forward. Yahweh, remember. Look behind you. Remember.
Yeah.
Because forward gives you no advantage of hindsight. Look back and remember helps you guide your footsteps into the future. Look back and remember is rational.
Right.
Forward, devil be damned, the torpedoes is irrational, even though Hamilton tried to argue the opposite.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? One of the most important classes I have given in a long time, and nobody wants to watch it.
Yeah.
We've broken faith.
Yeah.
We've broken faith. And that, folks, is why I'm pessimistic. The founders said that they rallied around the common tenets of Christianity, those beliefs that all Christians could agree to and still break bread. What are you going to rally around now? Trump? You're going to favor man over ideal? Good luck. You won't succeed because it makes you no better than the progressives. Just a different flavor of that ice cream. Charlie?
Happy 500th episode, Melt.
I'm going to do something a little different today, Charlie. I'm going to bump out of here and let you sign off. That's my 500th birthday present.
Well, about all I can say is, they've taken Looney Tunes now and they've thrown them in the trash. And so you can't even find them anymore unless you want to go out and find them on, DVD or Blu-ray or something, if you can still find them. But, first of all, just so I do some kind of a closing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for those few that do watch us, and those that do care about, liberty and, the things that this country used to mean back a while ago. And we will be back on Wednesday. I think he's going to continue talking about Passover and such. But this is the closing. That's all, folks.